Hello everyone, Harry Baldock here, editor for Total Telecom. We're here on day 2 of Connected North. I'm delighted to be joined by Gita Sorensen of GOS Consulting. Gita, thanks for being here. How are you finding the conference so far?
I think it's been amazing. This is the second year, and I was here for the first year last year as well. It's just, has it tripled, quadrupled? It's enormous, the quality is excellent.
It's really nice to hear. Yeah, it's definitely a much bigger than last year, and hopefully bigger still soon. You were on a panel yesterday that got quite fiery, I understand, on regulation. I think it was largely focused on the Equinox 2 pricing debate that's still ongoing, and it's kind of nicely timed with the event in the sense that Ofcom are currently discussing it and the consultation's ongoing. What do you think were the kind of key take-home messages from the panel yesterday?
So we talked about a number of topics, but if you start with Equinox 2, it's obviously we had a mixed panel. So we had a vertically integrated retail operator, which was HyperOptic. We had City Fibre that are wholesale only, and then we had Openreach, and then we also obviously had Ofcom on the panel. So we got quite a wide range of different perspectives on it. And I think what I'd say about it is that it is so incredibly complex, Equinox 2. I try very hard in panels like that to be as neutral as I can. My job in my day job is to work for Openreach competitors, so I'm very conscious of the potential competitive impact of Equinox 2 on those competitors, and therefore on the overall kind of competition in the telecoms market. And from that perspective, I think what the big takeaway was that there is a very, very deep concern about what the impact is going to be. The price levels that are going to be introduced through Equinox 2, because sadly I think they will be introduced, are below the level that Ofcom has calculated as a reasonable, efficient operator to Openreach. But Ofcom is saying that's kind of okay because some prices are above and some are below, and if you take the average, it's okay. That wasn't its position when it did Equinox 1, so it's kind of moved along. But then on top of that, we have a situation where in order to qualify for these discounts, the retail ISPs have to sell 90% FTTP connections on the Openreach network. And if they don't do that, then they lose the discounts across the entire country. And that is a cliff edge because the discounts are very significant against the somewhat high kind of standard rates that they have for fibre. So that basically creates a significant disincentive for operators to use both altnets and Openreach. And even though Ofcom has insisted that Openreach include this thing called the fail-safe mechanism, which is intended to try and exclude premises that the ISP is buying FTTP from altnets at, but it is such a complex process to do that it in itself actually to use that is a disincentive for the ISPs. So I have really deep concerns, and what was interesting was what at the end of the kind of panel discussion there was very lively debate in the audience, and it is clear that quite a lot of the audience members were deeply concerned about what the impact was going to be on their businesses as well.
Yeah, it's clearly like one of the hottest topics here at the event, and I think it's definitely very complicated. I think one of the things I quite like to ask you is about the kind of the time frame for all of this, because obviously we had Equinox 1 maybe 18 months ago, now Equinox 2, and I think a lot of the fears really is that it's going to just continue to go further and further. We'll have Equinox 3, Equinox 4. What do you think, I guess, the chances of that, and what kind of time frame are we looking at?
So obviously, I can't say because I'm not inside Openreach and their negotiations, but what we do know is that the original plan was that Equinox 2 was to land around 1 year after Equinox 1. Kind of events happened and it got delayed and it got notified in December, due to be launched in April this year, but now Ofcom has extended that by 2 months to do some more analysis. My anticipation is that as soon as this lands, there will be a new negotiation process for Equinox 3. And what's quite interesting is what we're seeing is that the Equinox 1 really addressed the issue of whether or not, in principle, the obligation or the thresholds of the 90% was something that Ofcom would object to. And Ofcom has now set a precedent saying they don't in principle object to that. Equinox 2 then challenged the principle whether the prices could go below the Ofcom cost model for a reasonably efficient operator. So what they're doing is at each level they're kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit, so that they get more and more commercial freedom in the way that they structure these discounts. Because in reality, if Openreach really wanted to just encourage operators to sell more fibre, why don't they just give them the cheaper prices without all the conditions attached, which could have significant anti-competitive effects? But they don't. So I think that's quite telling in its own right.
And assuming that Equinox 2 does go ahead as kind of planned, what kind of impact do you think this is going to have on the altnet community over the next few years? Because we're already starting to see consolidation with some of the smaller players, and obviously we kind of expect that to continue. Do you think this is going to really hasten the kind of demise of a lot of these altnets?
I wouldn't say hasten the demise. I would say it really does make the trading conditions for them tougher. I think the financing conditions are deteriorating. The cost of debt in particular, the terms of debt are changing quite rapidly. And I think, for example, we might actually see that the level of overbuild will reduce substantially as altnets depend more and more on debt than on equity. Because I think one of the reasons we've seen all the overbuild we have seen so far is lots of altnets secured lots of equity finance, and that equity finance came along with like targets. You have to deploy to X thousand premises within a specific period of time. But now that that's running out, they now have different funding, and that will have with it like drawdown conditions for each tranche that you draw down, and that those tranche conditions will be to do with whether or not there's anybody else there, what you think the take-up's going to be in that area, and things like that. So I think the operating model for altnets will tighten and change, and to an extent it might be for the better, because lots of overbuild by altnets of each other could be questionable business practice. But on the other hand, particularly at the wholesale level, it is becoming very, very difficult to exist for the altnets in the wholesale space, unless you have arrangements with lots of ISPs. And if the arrangement for the ISPs are going to be made so complicated by the compliance with this fail-safe mechanism, and because none of the ISPs can afford to not qualify for Equinox 2, because otherwise, if they haven't got that price level, they're like 30 to 50% higher cost level than their competitors, and they just can't afford to do that. So I think, yes, it is. We are already seeing consolidation. It is going to speed up, I think. It is partially kind of caused by this kind of activity. And what's a shame is that we would always expect to see consolidation. We'd also always expect to see some businesses fail, because that's what happens in business. But what's happening is that if it's being sped up, what you can find is that the people who have invested in those altnets to start with will not be able to get the kind of value for the assets that they've created that they would otherwise expect in a normal kind of commercial consolidation process. If it's being forced, then it kind of turns into more like a fire sale, and that actually, in my view, is really bad for UK PLC, because if the government says, come to the UK, invest in fibre because that is what we want you to do, and our policy is to support you as investors, and the government then goes and says, it's okay for the incumbent to introduce new frameworks that makes it hard, not just hard, but kind of incredibly hard and anti-competitive for the altnets to succeed, then that's an inconsistent message and could do harm for future UK infrastructure funding.
Yeah, it's definitely such a complicated topic. I think Ofcom are really in a tough spot with this one, and yeah, it's sure to have a very wide-reaching impact for years to come. So it's an exciting few months ahead. Gita, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.